Hey folks, Steve here, and talking head on 1998. Let's go back to 1998. Anna Kokkinos' film. Anna Kokkinos is a really interesting director. This was her debut movie, and a terrific debut. It was quite the buzz when it was released in 1998, both here and elsewhere, which I will talk to. Starring Alec Demetrianis, who was in another sort of well-received Christos Scholkes adaptation of The Slap, the TV series The Slap. Um, so he seems to work well in the world of Christos Scholkes, who wrote the book Head On. And we like Christos Scholkes for no other reason. There's many reasons to like Christos, but the central reason is that he's a mad Richmond Tigers supporter, and we love mad Richmond Tigers supporters in this course, of course. And if anyone doesn't have a football team, I will make you an honorary Richmond supporter. Get on the bus. Get on the Tigers bus is all I can say. Okay, so these are what we can see here. These are the two Australian publicity posters. What do you think about that? With Alex Demetrianis in both posters, one looking above the camera, at the other looking under the camera. Neither is he looking at the camera. And the tagline, the Australian tagline for the film, we love taglines in this course, and the tagline for this for the Australian release was, "Live one moment at a time, or take it as it comes, but face it all." And I'm going to declare it the worst tagline of an Australian film ever. That's a shocking tagline. Shocking. What they're thinking. Anyway, Head On. The Christos Scholkes book was called Loaded. What do you prefer, Loaded or Head On? The whole idea is he's facing life head on. Alex Demetrianis plays a young gay man. He's a bit angry. He's angry with everything. He's angry with the fact that he's Greek, that he's gay, that he doesn't really feel part of his community, any community. He's trying to find his place. And Christos Scholkes likes to write that kind of male, the young, angry, often Greek male. And that's what you get in this film. So these are the posters. What do you think of the posters? Now, let's just move on to the European posters. So the one on the left is the Cannes poster. The film did go to Cannes. Full on, all night, come on. That was the tagline used in Europe. I guess it's a better tagline. Still not great. I've got to say, worst thing about this film are the taglines. Really not very good. If you can think of a good tagline for the film, write to me. Let me know what you think. And then on the right, you've got 4 images of Alex Demetrianis. Each image, he doesn't look all that happy at all, which is a good representation of him in this film. He's not many laughs in the film. I'll just say that. He's quite an intense film. He's an intense character. And there's a sort of phonetic approach to the style of the film, which I think does represent the world of Hari, the central character. All right, now the film did well at specialty film festivals, and Kokkinos, the director, has always had a problem with this being referred to as a gay film. I mean, he is the central character is gay, but she's never seen herself as a gay director, even though she is gay. She wanted the film to be considered first and foremost as a film about a young man just trying to find his place in the world, more than being identified strictly as a gay and lesbian film. However, that being said, it did play at a number of gay and lesbian film festivals, and it won a number of these. So it won San Francisco International Lesbian and Gay Film Festival. Won there best first feature, right? And Anna, she received 10 grand, 10 grand for that. And then it played, a number of other festivals around mostly Europe and America. Some in America, some in Europe. But it did very well in most of the festivals. At Milan, it won Best Film. There you go, took over Best Film. So it is a film that, although it didn't have huge box office either in Australia or outside of Australia, was very well received in certain demographics. All right, now, after watching the film, or when you watch the film did very well critically. And for a low budget art house with gay and ethnic themes, you would think that the film probably didn't do as well as it actually did. And it did seem to tap in to an audience there. And you could say, well, it was probably tapping into a gay and ethnic film audience, and that there could be some truth to that. And I think that's worth actually acknowledging, because it is really important to put diversity on the screen. It's become a much more prominent aspect and dialogue and discussion point today. And I think in the late 90s, I feel like this was probably welcomed. Even for audience members who weren't gay or ethnic, it was good to see a different sort of Australia being put on the screen. And it was really a film that was coming out at a time where it was a more conservative time. I would say it was a very white period, as in all the characters were white essentially in Australia, and you weren't seeing a lot of I wouldn't say sexually diverse people, because I don't want to sort of just refer to gay people as diverse, because that kind of almost puts them in the category of the other, and I don't want to otherize gay people, because that's just actually part of the problem, right? It's just looking at all different sorts of people, all different sorts of sexual orientation, and just accepting them all for what they are. However, that being said, certainly in the 90s in Australia, the prominent people that were being put on the screen were white people in heterosexual relationships. So I think a film like Head On was well received because it was actually doing something a bit different. And it had a pretty good soundtrack, this film. The grungy, we were kind of getting to the late grungy scene. There was Silverchair appears in this film. Remember Silverchair? If you don't, look them up. Pack of kids who hit it big, ended up on the Dave Letterman show. Anyway, that's a different lecture. The rise and fall of Silverchair. Now, The Age on the 16th of January 1999 had it as number 3 in the box office, class of 98, with 1.68 million, and that put it behind the Wiggles movie. Well, you're not going to beat the Wiggles movie. And the Wiggles movie made 2.67 million in Australia. Wowee, that's big business for Wiggles. And Oscar and Lucinda also got 1.76 million. But third, I think Head On's pretty good, considering it was a very low budget film. So there you go. Now, Head On, we are in Melbourne, folks. We're in Melbourne for Head On. It is very much, you're going to see landmarks that you may live near or in. Anyone who lives in Footscray, right? Hello to you. And your suburb, your city, your community will feature quite prominently in this film, as will the western suburbs of Melbourne. And we've got the Westgate Bridge, Flynn Street Station, Old Melbourne Docks, blah, blah, blah. So there's a whole range of different sort of Melbourne that's going on here. And the question that I have to you is, as you are familiar with Melbourne to some degree, what sort of Melbourne is being represented in this film, right? Is this a Melbourne that's familiar to you? Um, there was another film around this period called Romper Stomper, which was also set around the Footscray area. And the criticism of that film is it's like, what is going on in this film? Because it's not a Footscray that people who lived in Footscray could really relate to, because they said this is not the world that we live in. This is an artificial kind of world. So that's my question to you. What sort of Melbourne is being represented, and is this Melbourne familiar to you? And thinking of other suburb films like, A Muriel's Wedding and other films where it's set in the suburbs, is there a similar sort of Australian suburb? Are all the suburbs different? Like Muriel being in Sydney and also in the Gold Coast. Right? Is that very different to what's being represented in Melbourne? So have a think about that in regard to location and landscape. All right, now, like I said, this is an adaptation. Jim Shembry, who wrote for The Age, he said this, because Head-On is drawn from the Christos Schelkes novel, Loaded, that's the name of the novel, it is tempting to rabbit on about the nature, intricacies of the adaptation, which is all fun and good, and which this reviewer could have done too. However, Jim Shembry's above that, folks. He goes on. Ultimately, though, such discussions are beside the point. The bottom line is, you don't go to the cinema to watch a book. Film adaptations must stand or fall on their merits as films. In the case of Head-On, it stands. Jim has given the film a big tick of approval. And I think it is actually a pretty good adaptation. Christos Schelkes, he's a funny writer because he's very visual and he's actually very cinematic in his writing, and he's actually someone who loves cinema. He's written film criticism. There was a Fred Skepsy film called The Devil's Playground, which he actually wrote a monograph on. A monograph is a short book, folks. He wrote a whole monograph on that book, on that film, sorry. So he loves the cinema. I actually brought him into a lecture when I was teaching a course, a genre course. This is a creative writing course. And he came in, and his advice to the first year creative writing students was, don't worry about writing for the next 3 years. Just watch a lot of different sorts of films and read a lot of books. And if you do that, you might have a chance of being a writer. The students thought he was crazy because they're like, why would we spend 3 years reading and watching when we should be writing? Well, his point was, before you breathe out, you have to breathe in. Anyway, I won't go into that, down that rabbit hole, but I think it's interesting that a lot of his adaptations actually don't work at all on the screen, but this does work on the screen, and there could be some reasons to that which we can unpack in the classroom. All right, now I want to get into some of the reviews, because the reviews were very split for this film. And it's always interesting. I always find it quite interesting to sort of go through the reviews retrospectively. Sandra Hall, who's always gives us some interesting things to think about with all of her reviews. She says, the style of the film, which was selected for Directors Fortnight at this year's Cannes Film Festival, is as fast and furious as Dimitriadis' performance, with lots of close-up and handheld camera work and some edgy characters tossed up along the way. And she's basically saying that's the real strength of the film, the style of the film. So she's really crediting Kokkinos' film, her style, the fact this is a really edgy, exciting debut film. It really announces a director that has arrived. It announces an actor who has arrived, and someone who can really handle something as heavy as Christos Schelkes' novel without being sort of overwhelmed by it. And I suppose that's what I'm getting at with Christos Schelkes' other adaptations. Sometimes it feels like the person producing it does feel overwhelmed by actually all the stuff that Christos is able to get into his books. Now, Luke Buckmaster, I have more problems with this review, and he says, Anna Kokkinos' fiery Melbourne-based film is a tense and bold character study, and one that is almost haunting in its realism. perhaps the most daring of its production assets is the film's dramatic script, which positions its protagonist in various off-putting homosexual, confrontational, and drug-induced acts. Disturbing stuff, that's for sure, and Kokkinos knows it. If you're feeling brave, take a long, deep breath and watch head on. Okay, these are my problems, right? With his phrase, its protagonist in various off-putting, homosexual, confrontational, and drug-induced acts. Off-putting for who, Luke? Off-putting for you, it seems. Is that what you're talking about? Are you talking about yourself? I mean, would you say characters in a heterosexual relationship were put in off-putting, confrontational, drug-induced acts? I probably would think not. Are you saying that about Pretty Woman? Yeah, putting that to you. You saying about Pretty Woman? It doesn't really. I mean, it does kind of come across as kind of the old man who doesn't get the kids these days sort of review, which is ironic because Luke at the time would not have been that old at all, and the review wasn't written for a mainstream conservative. You know, it wasn't written for the Herald Sun. It was written actually for a one of those film mags. So I find it problematic on numerous levels, what he's actually saying. Now, it doesn't really sell the film that well. Like if you're feeling brave, take a long, deep breath and watch head on. So he's basically saying it's an enduring kind of thing that you just have to get through rather than experience it. And I think that is a completely unfair way of setting up Head On, because I think Head On is a riveting and absorbing piece of filmmaking. And I credit you, Anna Kokkinos, for your work. Terrific stuff. And I think Luke is he's not right at all. But hey, maybe you agree with Luke. Who knows? Now, the American reviews, this is the last review I'll look at before moving on. Stephen Holden of the New York Times, he seems a bit confused. He said, Head On seems hopelessly divided against itself. On one hand, it glamorizes Ari as a heroic sexual rebel, right? And on the other, it portrays him as a lazy, violent, self-hating, bigot-headed, for imminent self-destruction. The images don't jibe. Man. Well, he didn't put man, but it feels like it needed a man there. All right, well, there's some problems with that, in that, again, don't agree with you, Stephen. I mean, he's right. Like, it is all of that, but that's the point. like there is something about Kokkinos showing this character who is this young, beautiful, young male, right? But he's still kind of messed up and he's still dealing with all this shit. And it's not easy being, gay and Greek and young and, all of these things which are always difficult to just sort of negotiate because of the world that he's in. I mean, he's in Melbourne. He's got to deal with stuff like homophobia and racism and all this stuff that's all around him all the time, right? And that can create a lot of anger. And also he's a young, angry male. So he's dealing with all that. So yes, he can still be a young, beautiful person who's also dealing with his own sort of shit. And I think that's the point that the film makes. And I think it does it in a very effective way. And Stephen Holden thinks that the two are in contrast. Well, they are in contrast because we're all in contrast. This is the point of being human. We are constantly in contrast with ourselves. Now, the film did well in Australia critically. So at the Australian Film Institute Awards, it got nominated for a whole bunch of stuff. It lost out to The Boys was a popular film of that year, and also The Interview, which also starred, would you believe it, Alex Dimitriadis. What a year he had. He would have had quite a party, wouldn't he, at the Australian Film Institute Awards, 1998. Anyway, The Interview won Best Film for that year. Anyway, he got nominated for Best Actor. Best Costume Designer got nominated. Anna Kokkinos got nominated for Best Direction. It won Best Editing. Yay! Best Film was nominated, and goes on and on. Anyway, in the LA Outfest Grand Jury Award, Outstanding Foreign Narrative Feature wins, and it won Best First Feature at the San Francisco International Lesbian and Gay Film Festival. I think I already said that. Now, as I said, Anna Kokkinos, so she's born in Melbourne. The film's set in Melbourne, and she's gay. And although she's a woman, the film is, adapting a book about a gay man, and she's making a film about a gay man. But it is a shared lived experience of being a gay person in the world. And she realized she was gay at the age of 15, and she spoke about this a lot in the press for the film, right? That, yes, I'm a gay person, I'm making a gay film. And she says, quote here, I went through a very long process of having to come to terms with that, and that wasn't easy, but I don't think it's easy for anyone. And she's talking about herself, but she's pretty much talking about the character of Ari in the film, right? And that's the whole thing. So I think there is something about the lived experience, and it's really interesting to think of, the characters that really resonate. And I want to come to this term resonate because there is something about resonance in this film that feels very true and very authentic. And I don't think I could be wrong, but I think a straight person who's not born in Melbourne or hasn't lived in Melbourne would make a very different film, and it wouldn't have that resonance and that authenticity. And I think there is something about this film that really does ring true. And surely a big part of that is Anna Kokkinos really understanding Ari character really well, and also Alex Dimitriadis as well. He's Greek. He's he's from Melbourne. Blah blah blah. Think about that, and let's chat about that further. So just some final thoughts. So this is an adaptation. Do we watch this as an adaptation? Like, at what point do you know it's an adaptation? Beyond the text at the start of the film saying, this is an adaptation. Is it an adaptation, and how is it an adaptation? Now, the film was made in 1998, and obviously we are now a couple of decades beyond 1998. Is the film nostalgic? Like, when you watch this film, are you watching a film about Melbourne, the 90s, a different sort of Melbourne? Is there a nostalgia to what you're watching? Or are you feeling like this is still very much contemporary Melbourne? Right? And I'll be very interested to hear those responses. Now, why was the film so successful in Australia? Do you think it was successful critically, commercially, pulled a really strong audience, probably an audience they weren't expecting? So think about that. And in answering that, you probably answer the next question, which who was the film made for? And a film is never made just for one group, but it sort of is kind of made for one group. And I think there's something about the independent film scene during this time, which was very alive and happening. And even the films that were coming out of America at this time, like the American film independent scene was hugely popular at the time. You've got people like Jim Jarmusch and Hal Hartley and Kelly Reichardt, and all of these really fantastic indie directors are coming up in America, and all of those films are playing at the independent cinemas in Australia, and they were being double billed with films like Head On. So it actually gave an opportunity for also the local independent scene to actually really get up and going as well, because audiences were actually going to the cinemas, going to these independent cinemas to see really good, edgy, exciting independent films. How's the country and land depicted? So how is Melbourne depicted? How is Australia depicted? And finally, accents. How and why are they used? Languages, we don't just hear the language of English, we hear the Greek language, we hear a whole range of different languages here. And I think that's really effectively done as well to actually create a very multicultural kind of world. And music is so important to this film, just the sound of actually what's going on. All right, I'll leave it there. That's Head On. I think it's a really strong, powerful film, really important film, really good film, and I look forward to watching this and chatting with it further with you all. So that's it from me. See you later. Bye for now.